Hey, ChatGPT, can you discuss the reasons behind the fall of empires in history? Please provide some insight on this topic for about 40 seconds.
Quran, Surah Al-Imran chapter 3 verses 26 to 27. Say, O Allah, Master of the kingdom, you give the kingdom to whom you will, and you take the kingdom from whom you will, and you honor whom you will, and you humble whom you will. In your hand is unlimited. Indeed, you are over all things competent. This verse highlights the divine control over the rise and fall of powers, emphasizing that authority and honor ultimately come from God. Clearly, the fall of empires throughout history can often be traced to several key factors. Economic decline. Many empires face financial troubles due to overexpansion, excessive military spending, or reliance on slave labor, leading to instability. Political corruption. Corruption and ineffective leadership can erode public trust, weaken governance, and create internal strife. Military overextension. Engaging in prolonged wars or spreading too thin can drain resources and leave empires vulnerable to external attacks. Cultural assimilation. As empires expand, they often struggle to integrate diverse cultures, leading to dissent and loss of cohesion. External pressures. Invasions, rival powers, and economic competition can destabilize empires, often leading to their collapse. These factors create a complex web of challenges that can ultimately result in the decline or fall of powerful empires. Well, if we analyze all of these deficiencies, you will find that it is just one country that fits into it today.
Thank you so much, ChatGPT. Let's dive deeper into this chapter together with Jack and Wilson. Hey everyone, before we dive into that, I was delving into my YouTube channel analytics and noticed most of you who watch my videos are not subscribed to the channel. Would you do me a huge favor, please, and hit the subscribe button? It really motivates me and helps the channel to grow so I can do more videos just like the one you're about to watch. So without further ado, let's dive in.
All right, so today we're diving into a question that I think has probably crossed all our minds at some point. How do empires fall? And, could the U.S. be on a similar trajectory? We're going to be using this YouTube video. It's called How Empires Fall and Why the U.S. is Next. It's from a channel called Uncivilized as kind of our springboard for this conversation.
Yeah.
But don't worry, we're not just going to replay the whole thing. We're going to pull out those really interesting points and then, kind of connect the dots and see if we can learn something from it all.
Sounds good.
So the video makes this pretty bold claim. It argues that the U.S. is showing these three major symptoms of decline that we've seen, in empires throughout history. So are you ready to kind of unpack those symptoms and see if they hold up?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, cool. So the first symptom that they highlight is this idea of economic disparity, right? Like this gap between the rich and the poor and the internal decay that can lead to.
Right.
And they draw this really striking parallel between the U.S. and the Roman Empire. And I don't know about you, but when I think about the Roman Empire, I immediately picture those crazy feasts, right?
Right,
where
yeah.
the elites are just swimming in luxury.
Eating peacock tongue and all that.
Yeah, exactly. But the video, it points out that all of that extravagance, it existed alongside extreme poverty for the vast majority of Romans.
Yeah.
And they're basically arguing that we're seeing a similar dynamic playing out in the U.S. today.
Right. They're saying that this pattern, this concentration of wealth at the very top, it's something that you see in a lot of empires that are kind of on the decline. And they point to the U.S. and say, look, you have this crazy level of wealth inequality. I mean, they even say 90% of the wealth is concentrated at the top, leaving everyone else, fighting over scraps.
Yeah. And they don't even stop there. They also point to crumbling infrastructure as another sign of this potential internal decay, our roads and our airports, our bridges. And there's really symbols of a thriving, superpower.
Right. It's a provocative point for sure.
Yeah.
Because, you would think that a nation that's doing well would be investing in those things.
Exactly.
So it makes you kind of wonder, what are the priorities here? And the video argues that, this neglect of essential infrastructure, it's a sign that maybe the system is prioritizing the interests of the wealthy over the needs of, the majority of the people.
So how does this economic divide, how does that actually connect to the fall of empires? Is it really that significant?
Well, history shows us, right? When there's this huge gap between the rich and the poor, it creates all kinds of problems.
Okay.
You often see social unrest. People lose trust in the institutions. They start feeling like the system is rigged.
Yeah.
And that can, it can make things really unstable.
It's almost like a crack in the foundation of a building.
Yeah, exactly.
Like if it's not addressed, it can eventually lead to the whole structure just collapsing.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay, so that's economic disparity and internal decay.
Yeah.
But the video doesn't stop there, right? They go on to talk about the second symptom of decline, which is the waning of soft power. Now, this is a term that I think can be a little, slippery, right? What exactly is soft power?
Yeah, no, you're right. It's definitely one of those terms that people throw around, but they don't always really understand it. I think the easiest way to think about it is like influence through attraction rather than coercion.
Okay.
So it's not about forcing people to do what you want. It's about getting them to want what you want.
So it's more about persuasion and influence.
Exactly.
Got it.
And the video uses the Ottoman Empire as an example. Initially the Ottomans, they held sway through a combination of diplomacy and cultural influence, right? But then over time, as nationalism grew within their territories, things started to shift. People started to prioritize their own identities and interests over the empire.
Interesting.
And that's when their grip on power began to loosen. They were losing that soft power.
So they're basically saying that we're seeing a similar trend with the U.S. today.
Yeah, that's the argument.
And I think it's important to acknowledge, right, that the U.S. has historically been extremely successful at wielding soft power.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, think about the allure of the American dream or the global reach of, Hollywood movies and music.
Right.
But the question is, are those things still as potent as they once were?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And, the video contends that America's soft power has been, eroding in recent years. And one of the main reasons they point to is this perceived lack of moral consistency.
Okay.
They bring up things like the attack on the Capitol, the Black Lives Matter protests.
Right.
And they say these events kind of highlight how America's actions haven't always lined up with its stated values.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I do. And it's not just about domestic issues either, right? It's also about how the U.S. behaves on the world stage.
Yeah, exactly. They talk about foreign policy decisions, particularly those involving military intervention, as also contributing to this perception that there's this disconnect between what the U.S. says and what it actually does.
And I think the video is really saying that actions speak louder than words in this case.
100%.
So it sounds like they're making a pretty thought-provoking point here. Has the U.S. lost its moral high ground, so to speak?
Yeah.
And if so, what are the consequences for its global influence?
It's the big question, isn't it?
It is. It's definitely something to ponder as we move on to the third symptom the video discusses. But we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be right back to dive into that.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we're back and we're ready to dig into that third symptom of decline that the video talks about, the burden of hard power. What exactly do they mean by that?
So they make this interesting point about, for this whole global system to kind of work the way it does, the people who are being exploited, kind of had to buy into the whole thing. They have to believe that even though it's flawed, ultimately it's beneficial for everyone.
And that might be a hard sell these days, right?
Yeah, exactly. Especially with, all the things we talked about, like the inequality, the instability, the climate change stuff. It's getting harder to ignore those cracks in the foundation.
Right. It's like all these problems are kind of bubbling up to the surface. And it seems like they're suggesting that the U.S., as the architect of this system, is starting to face some pushback.
Yeah, both at home and abroad.
Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Well, it's definitely a perspective worth thinking about. Remember, this video is just presenting one viewpoint. They're not claiming to have all the answers or anything, but it's a way to understand, historical patterns and what's going on in the world right now. It encourages us to think critically,
Right, to question things.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the key trends they talk about is this idea of multipolarity.
Okay, so for those of us who might not be familiar with that term, can you kind of break it down for us?
Sure. So basically, multipolarity means that instead of having one dominant power, like the U.S. has been for decades, power is distributed among multiple players.
So like a more level playing field, in a way.
Yeah, in a sense. It's like that old saying, what goes up must come down.
And the video is basically saying that the U.S. is starting to come down.
That's what they're suggesting. We're moving away from this unipolar world, dominated by the U.S., toward a more multipolar system where other countries are becoming more powerful.
And they specifically mentioned the BRICS nations, right?
Yeah, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. They're kind of the poster children for this shift in power. And it's not just about, like, military strength or money.
It's more than that.
Yeah. These countries are forming new alliances, creating new institutions, you know. They have different visions for the future.
So it's about influence, too.
Yeah, absolutely. The video points to, like, the emergence of new trading blocs, financial institutions, things like that. Things that are challenging the current, like, U.S.-led order.
Yeah.
For example, the BRICS nations have their own development bank, and then there's China's Belt and Road Initiative.
Okay, so it sounds like things are getting a lot more complex on the global stage.
Oh, definitely. And the question is, you know, how does the U.S. fit into all of this? How does it adapt to this multipolar world?
Right, because it can't just stay the same, can it?
Well, that's what the video seems to be saying. They lay out, like, these potential paths that the U.S. could take.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What are those paths?
So path number one is kind of like business as usual.
Meaning?
Well, the U.S. could just keep doing what it's doing,
Yeah.
prioritizing military strength, you know, resisting this whole shift toward multipolarity.
So basically doubling down on the current approach.
Yeah, exactly. But the video argues that this path is probably going to lead to more decline, more resistance from other countries, maybe even conflict.
So it's a path where the U.S. becomes more and more isolated.
Yeah, kind of struggling to hold on to power in a world that's changing.
Okay, so that's path number one. What about path number two? Is there like a more optimistic option?
Well, the second path involves the U.S. kind of changing its approach, like embracing collaboration, working with other nations to tackle those big challenges like climate change and poverty, you know, trying to create a more equitable world order.
So instead of being the sole superpower, the U.S. would become more of a team player.
Exactly. It would require giving up some of that control, being more diplomatic.
But is that realistic? I mean, would the U.S. really be willing to share power like that?
That's the big question, isn't it? And it kind of leads us to the third path, which is, well, it's the most unsettling possibility.
Okay, I'm ready. What's path number three?
So this path is, it basically involves a much more dramatic decline for the U.S., maybe even collapse. Like internal divisions and external pressures just become too much to handle.
Wow, that's a pretty dark picture.
It is. But the video makes the point that it's not impossible. We've seen it happen before with other empires that seemed untouchable.
Right, like the Roman Empire.
Exactly.
Okay, so those are the three paths: business as usual, collaboration, or collapse. Do they say which path is the most likely?
They don't really give a definite answer. They're just saying that the future is still being written, and the choices that the U.S. makes and other countries make will determine what happens.
So it's like we're at this crossroads, and the decisions we make now will have a ripple effect for years to come.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've been focusing a lot on the U.S., but what about the rest of the world? I mean, what role do other countries play in shaping this new world order?
That's a great question. And the video definitely acknowledges that the future isn't just about the U.S. We're all interconnected. The video talks about the rise of regional powers like China, India, and Russia as key players in this whole thing.
Right, because they have their own goals and ambitions, too.
Yeah, exactly. They're going to have a huge impact on how things unfold. And the video also points out that it's not just about nation states anymore. You know, we have these other powerful actors like international organizations, multinational corporations, social movements. They're becoming more and more influential.
So it's a much more complex system than it used to be.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the main takeaway is that the future is uncertain. But we know it's going to be shaped by all these different forces, the choices the U.S. makes, what other countries do, the influence of these non-state actors.
It's a lot to think about, and this video has really given us a lot to chew on. It's like we're not just passively watching history unfold, we're all part of it.
Absolutely. We encourage you to keep exploring these ideas, you know, do your own research, talk to people, and think about what kind of world you want to be a part of.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Remember, stay curious and stay engaged.
Thank you for joining us for today's podcast. I hope you've gained some valuable insights. If you're a truth seeker, yearning for divine light and ready to step out of darkness, now is your moment. The truth is that Allah is the one and only creator of the universe. He has sent over 124,000 messengers and prophets to guide humanity, starting with Adam and culminating with the final messenger, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon them all. If you resonate with this message, you might be ready to embrace Islam. Simply recite the Shahada, the Islamic declaration of faith. For further support, feel free to join our WhatsApp group. You can send us a private message there. The link is in the video description. Don't wait until it's too late. We look forward to connecting with you soon.